Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs, connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
Great. Well, sorry about the technical error there. I apologize. And I'm now giving the floor to Abdullah.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And let me just start off by saying a huge thanks to yourself, to Jeru, to the entire team at Catalyst for giving us this opportunity. This means a lot to our team, and we're really excited for today's conversation. My name is Abdullahi Alim, and I'm from the Global Shapers community at the World Economic Forum. I'm joined by my colleagues, Natalie, if you give them a quick wave, we have Anna, we have Karen, I think also on the line. And really today's activity is based off a product that we're trying to develop called a Millennial Manifesto. And essentially it's premised on the idea or exercise of us trying as best as we can to practice good ancestorship. And what does that mean more specifically? It basically asks and invites all of us who do not necessarily represent Generation Z, so that's everyone from millennial and above, to think about all the ways in which we can collate, bring together the best parts of the ways in which we've approached social change, and also for us to reflect over the parts of our social justice activism that have proven problematic or that have limited our reach. And so this Millennial Manifesto is an opportunity for us to provide almost like a guiding North Star to the next generation who, just based off of the worst, public health, economic, social justice, and climate reckoning of our time, will have to mend a world with far more examples of systemic inequalities. And just the nature of this world that they will inherit means that, we I think as the ancestors to this upcoming generation can give as much of ourselves to say, this is the best way to approach social change. This is the best way to adopt a matured style of activism. This is how you can make sure you can navigate systems of power, for example, without being co-opted. This is how you can come into spaces of activism without bringing in your own personal trauma, your own personal challenges, which sometimes limit the scope of our work and scope of our reach. It also invites us to reflect on all the ways in which we have, to some degree, or maybe to a lesser degree, demonstrated signs of heropreneurship, which is the idea that, sometimes we center the work of our impact initiatives around our own desires to find meaning and to find purpose and to find praise in the social impact sector, as opposed sometimes to centering this very, very important work around the interests and needs of the oppressed. So what are the best forms of social justice activism that we can impart to this next generation? And what are the parts of our own internal reflective assessment of our social justice journeys, whether you have just joined this journey towards social change, or whether you come from a tradition an indigenous tradition, for example, that has been doing this for centuries upon centuries? What is the best and what are the worst parts in which we want to be able to share as learning lessons to the next generation as they attempt to mend systems that were inevitably far more fractured and unfortunately so due to the onset of this pandemic. So today is going to be a guided discussion on just trying to make sense of what each of us think are the best parts of our social change journey, and what are some of the parts that require a bit of revision. And moreover, we want to just make a sense of what are the principles, what are the ideas, what are the actions that we think we could present to this next generation as we curate a Millennial Manifesto, almost as a guiding North Star for the next generation as they approach social change as well. I'm joined by a team of global shapers, including Tariq Alolaini from the Manama Hub. We have Nora Baruba also joining in from Stockholm, as well as Andre. Where's Andre? Andre also dialing in from Medellin as well. They represent the core team, but they're also backed by an entire team of other global shapers, such as Fatima Zahra on the line here from Casablanca, as well as Flavio and a few others from Manchester too. So I'm going to pass the floor to Andre right now, but I hope you'll enjoy this exercise, and I just invite each of us to be as reflective and as giving in the insights that we share for this next generation as they approach social justice activism. Andre, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fellow Abdullahi. Two words were very important in what Abdullahi just said: reflection and giving. And this weekend, I have seen all the protests in Colombia, and I was hearing the comments of many people, and they were saying that this was the same in the 60s, in the 70s, and all back in those years, every time people said, this is important for the youth. So my invitation for all of you is to channel all of these lessons of you as youth, no matter what is your age, because all of you are young. And my invitation to you is to reflect. In your view, what barriers have hindered progress to the impact that young people seek? And what internal change is needed to catalyze external impact to improve the state of the world? This is an invitation to make this reflection during 2 minutes and share in the chat what you think can be the lessons for the next generation that is coming. Be the best ancestors, please. Participation, collaboration, challenge everything. Youth having a voice, which is one of the essence of Global Shapers and why Global Shaper exists. This is the starting point to reflect. And now I want to invite you to have a voice and be able to speak to each other. So I will pass it on to Tariq, who will tell us what are we going to do next.
Thank you, Andres. And as you finish putting your thoughts into the chat, I'll introduce the next exercise, where we'll be going into breakouts, where we'll be able to not only explore the barriers, but some of these key values, principles, and practices that you feel you want to hand over and that you believe will enable us to foster this long-lasting systemic impact for the next decade. So in the chat, I have just shared a Google slide deck that we will invite each group to work through. So each group will be working on just one of these slides. And the invitation here is that for the first around 15 minutes, we invite to have a discussion around what are some of the key values, principles, and practices that will enable us as young people to foster long-lasting systemic impact. And then after that discussion, reflection, and we invite you as well to make a note of those so that we can harvest them later. Choose or highlight maybe 1 to 3 words that resonate with you based on your discussion. Then for the last 10 minutes, we invite you to create a good enough for now blurb or sentence about just one principle that you feel you want to share as a message or a call for action from our generation to the next generation of change makers or youth leaders. And our general sort of guidance is that don't overthink this. It can be sort of plain and simple language. Ideally, we invite you to speak from the heart and be creative, and also invite you to use affirmative language. We will then have a debrief once we come back from the groups, and also share some of the next steps of what we're going to be doing with these insights. So you'll have 25 minutes in total, 15 minutes for that initial discussion, around 10 minutes or so to really write out your sentence and blurbs. Before we go into breakouts, are there any questions of clarification on the exercise that we're about to go into, or to have a general sense of thumbs up if that's clear?
I see Kristen has her hand raised.
Thank you. Just a quick question. How do you define youth?
Excellent question. So here, I think we are, again, we're looking at Gen Z as what Abdullah mentioned, is really who the audience will be for the Millennial Manifesto, and it being Millennial Manifesto of indeed the lessons that we've learned from this millennial generation and passed on to Gen Z. Ashraf?
Yeah, hi. So I have a question. I just want to get the context right. Your language is what is one generation passing on to another. So this is not an intergenerational conversation then. You want us to talk about what one generation is passing on to another. I'm just asking, I want to be clear. Is that the tone? Yeah, because then there is an assumption that we are wise and we are passing something to the other. And if we were wise, then we would not be here in this world, in this current situation. I'm just asking, what's the
That's a really good question. Yeah. And in fact, this is just one of many consultations that we're leading. So this is just one representation of that. There's no seniority, to be honest, against age to suggest that one is more wise than the other. In fact, that power dynamic is something we're trying to work actively against. But to make sure that this is truly intergenerational, we want to make sure that all generations are represented. This particular avenue is just one of them, but of course we're having conversations with people far older and far younger than today's average age.
Okay.
Thanks. If I may, when I was speaking to Abdullah, basically what we were saying is that there is a lot with social entrepreneurs in Catalyst who've been there for a long time, have learned mistakes they have made, learnings they have shared on their journey. And I think this is about sharing the learning, sharing the journey, being part of the journey, and together when co-creating the Millennial Manifesto, which Abdullah, Natalie, and the other people in all the young shapers are trying to do. So I think that's this has come from. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Thanks, Jeru.
And thank you all for your questions. I think that was clarifying for everyone. Thank you. Any last questions or clarifications before we head out into the breakouts? No? So with that, perhaps I'll invite Natalie to send us off into our groups. The rest of the group to come through the Zoom breakout wormholes. And with that, I will hand it over to Nora.
Thank you, and welcome back everyone from the breakout sessions. I hope you had productive discussions. Maybe you can just do a thumbs up or put one of the emojis on the screen to say how your discussions went in the groups. I see 2 thumbs up from someone. Thumbs up, everyone. Perfect. So we are now doing a reporting back to kind of harvest the ideas that you came up with in the groups. And to do this, I'll call on the groups by number, because I'm not sure who was in which group, and ask one person to report back in a minute or so on the reflections you shared and the values, principles, and practices that you came up with. Anyone from group 1?
Was that our group? Just wanted to confirm.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So just a key couple points as takeaways, and my other group members feel free to also add if I miss anything. So one of the things that was brought up is the balance of patience, but also to be used as a tool. So urgency to be used as a motivator, but then also patience to understand that life is long and that patience is needed for change to happen. So balancing patience and impatience that young people are that are experiencing, and that every young person has agency. So that's another kind of important point related to that. We also talked about you can't scale unless the fundamentals of the organizations are based on values. So this concept of values-based leadership and also values as a source of motivation. Related to the themes that we talked about also is this concept of deep listening, and that deep listening is really needed kind of as a starting point for any kind of systems change, to understand the system and understand where people are coming at in that system. And that young people, I think, have the capacity and are also, and we're seeing this, I think, in a lot of different ways, that young people need to be the problem solvers as well, and need to be given the tools and given the power, I think, to make the changes that they want to see. We talked about also tied to values-based leadership, and that it's important to reflect not only what is being done, but how it's being done and how that change is being led, tying back to values and those underlying beliefs behind those values. And I think maybe I'll leave it at that. If there's anything else that I've missed, please, group members, jump in.
Thank you, Robin, for that exhaustive summary. It seems you had time to discuss many different aspects, and I really like this aspect of balancing the patience and the impatience of change, understanding that change takes time, but perhaps not being fine with the fact that change takes time, and pushing, and also the importance of values-based leadership and many other important aspects that you discussed in the group. So thank you so much for presenting those, and we'll definitely take them with us. The next group number 2, is my group, and we have Janet presenting.
Yes, hi, thanks, Nora, thank you. We had a very deep discussion and very inclusive discussion, and interestingly, Robin, picking up on the comments that came out of your group, we also did talk quite a bit about the reality of how long change takes and the need for patience, and how this may be achieved in a way that we facilitate intergenerational dialogue, both and also peer-to-peer dialogue, and really figuring out a way that we can understand that change takes time. And I think that's where some of the experiences of people who've been at this, as I look around at some of my colleagues, for many, many years, where we started with that impatience, and it's not that we lose it, but change does take time. So how do we build that in? And the values component of sustainability is so critical. We talked a lot about an inclusive economy, linking that in, and the importance of not losing sight of that, because the power dynamics that are going on with respect to that have deep impact, and how we must ensure that we're thinking and understanding the systems of power at that point. We also really had an interesting discussion on the digital divide, and the fact that access to the internet and beyond must be a human right, and the role that we can potentially play in that, and a way in which perhaps Generation Z finally can play a critical role in ensuring that this yet another divide, and a gender digital divide, can be overcome, and the role that this generation can play in that. Also bearing in mind the importance of human connection, so that what have we learned from way back in the 60s and the 70s and community change, and bringing that forward in a digital world, and not losing sight of the reality that at a community level, people want to be connected and that human interaction. So looking at the internet as a, the connections of humans, but then also that physical connection. Much more to say. I hope I captured it for the group. Kristen, you had some really strong remarks about the principles that you're following with respect to children. So we did, let's make sure peer-to-peer we also engage young children as well. Anything else from anyone else in the group?
Wonderful summary, Janet. And as you said, it was a very rich discussion. And I think we are also starting to see some red threads between the different groups, this issue of patience and impatience. We discussed that tackling inequalities and looking at this aspect of inclusive economy is a way to create agency. That's one of the tools to look at, and really looking at it both bottom up and top down. And I think Kristen brought in these important child rights frameworks that can be very useful in accelerating children and young people's agency and participation. So thank you so much. The next group is group number 3. And I Fatima.
That was our group. So in our group, we talked about how we can effectively contribute to decision making and solution building in a way that enables us to enhance our ability to, one, diagnose the systemic issues, not just look at them from a symptoms level, and then how we can address them with systemic solutions. And so if I can recap it in 3 points. First, to ensure a representation of every intersection of our society. 2, to foster complementarity in ideas and action by, 1, identifying what is it that we genuinely care about, and then 2, what is it that we're good at, and then 3, presented as this is my contribution to addressing the systemic issue, and then listening to all the other contributions in the room to understand how all our puzzle pieces fit within the big picture. And 3 is listen before we assume, to be able to establish that shared language and meet people where they are, not simply expect them to meet us where we are. Joseph, Steve, Maishla, Yasmi, Naomi, anything you want to add? Anything that I missed? I guess not. All right, thank you.
Well done, Fatima Zahra. And I really like this kind of metaphor of the puzzle and figuring out which puzzle pieces we can be based on, our strengths and which puzzle pieces already exist on functions are filled by others. Very holistic image your group gave us. The next group is group number 4.
I believe that's us. I can start. We also talked about listening and inclusion, but we focused on the commonality of what makes us all human. We talked about the barriers of language, the barriers of people who are not so articulate, and we were wondering about other ways to express one's opinion and one's point, because it's not because your language is not well understood, it's not because you're not able to articulate your thoughts with your words that you deserve not to be heard. So we talked about different ways to express a point of view, such as like through arts mainly, music, drawing, improv, and we basically discussed a way to collect thoughts and input from everyone. Paramita from our group is working with children who don't necessarily speak English, and there's a need for an intermediary to actually collect their thoughts. So there's always a lost in translation with intermediaries. So we definitely need to come up with different ways to collect thoughts from everyone to make sure everyone is heard.
Thank you for that summary, and an important reflection also to add this element of barriers of language and different forms of communicating. So thank you for adding those pieces to this puzzle that is this conversation. From group number 5, we have Juliana Gonzalez.
Yes, hi everyone. Well, we had an interesting discussion around different topics, but I think that what we end up coming with is that we need to stop working in silos, and to stop working in silos, we need to embrace empathy, embrace humility when we're working, and we would like to advise, or what we'd like to just embrace in the youth and in the young generation, is to embrace empathy, collaborative action, and collective thinking, and to just not striving for perfection but consensus. That was like the wrap up of everything that we discussed.
Thank you, Juliana. And it's an important message of, how do you ensure you don't work in silos, and how do you translate that to collaborative processes and action? So thank you so much. We are going to group number 6, which is our last group.
I can go with group 6 because I don't want to put anyone in the spotlight, but I will try to capture the conversation. And it was very interesting because we crafted a sentence to capture what is the process of collaboration, because we wanted to go into the meaning of what collaboration means. So the sentence we had at the end was about engage inwards and engage outwards. So being introspective, but also engage with respect. Respect as a very strong, important word in this. Engage to listen, engage to understand, engage to have a dialogue, engage to co-create, engage to collaborate. We'll try to capture the process for collaboration, because one of the things that was said in the team by Deep Jyoti is that it's not about transferring this knowledge, but about transferring how to create knowledge. And Jeru also mentioned the importance of respect for this intergenerational collaboration and dialogue, where everyone hears and listens to each other. So thank you so much for the team.
Thank you. I love that saying, learning how to transfer, how to create knowledge. I think that's something that we can all take with us. And I think this exercise also has been a good example of this intergenerational non-silo approach. So I want to thank you all for taking the time and contributing with your ideas. This process of the Millennial Manifesto is one where we really want to get a sense of, what can we learn from the way that young people work today? What can we learn from Gen Z? But what can we learn from the past and those who have been doing this change makers work for a long time? And what lessons can we pass on so that we can provide some sort of a roadmap for the next generation, where they don't have to go through the same challenges, and where we can be allies in that work. And it's a consultative effort of young people within the Global Shapers community, youth organizations, and yourself in Catalyst 2030. And I'm handing over to Natalie now to just end and summarize the conversation.
That was beautifully said, Nora. I don't think there's anything left to add. Perhaps I'll just share with you that a sincere thank you for joining today's dialogue and for participating in today's conversation. As you may have heard at the top of this session, this is just one dialogue that we've hosted, but Global Shapers over the last 10 weeks have hosted over 250 dialogues around the world in over 100 countries, engaging over 2 million citizens in this work about thinking through our future, and particularly the principles, partnerships, and practices that are needed to achieve systemic change. So your insights today have been so deeply appreciated and will feed into the Millennial Manifesto, which will launch with Catalyst in July this summer. So we are so appreciative. I also want to take just a quick opportunity to thank Jeru for convening this space and inviting us into this space. It was a pleasure to contribute to this summit. So thank you. And a big thank you to Yvonne as well for making sure that this dialogue ran smoothly. We see the people behind the scenes who make it happen. So thank you, Yvonne. And thank you to all of our global shapers who facilitated today's session, Andres, Nora, and Tarek, as well as all those who participated. It was a wonderful discussion. So a big thank you, and wishing everyone a nice afternoon or day wherever you're dialing in from.